محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وأما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المتين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I express my condolences to each and every one of you, to the Imam of our age, and to Mu'mineen and Mu'minat worldwide, as we're still commemorating the Shahadat of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam, and the Shahadat of his noble father Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his companions and his family members. Over the last few days, we've covered a wide range of topics. And as you may have figured out, you may know by now, the focus of my discussions have been family. Simply because, as we mentioned in the beginning of our discussions, the institution of family is one of those things that Allah established for the protection of the religion. It's the only way in which religion is protected. It's the only way in which religion is projected into the next generation, and it's the only way that religion will be established anywhere on the face of the earth. We can go and we can do tabligh and we can spread message and we can give out magazines and pamphlets, but the influence of our families and the strength that Islam gains from strong and unified and Muslim families does a greater job of establishing Islam than any other force. And this has been our focus, basically, for all of our discussions. Now, we got into yesterday and the day before into discussing more and more the role of women in Islam. And I had chosen to discuss this simply because everyone knows that Islam certainly has a male foundation, that men are involved and responsible and active in the establishment and spread of Islam. But all too often we forget just how important the women of Islam have been in establishing this religion and in protecting this religion and in sending this religion forward generation after generation. And I don't want us at all to forget this point, simply because the female side, everybody on this side of this parde, they have a valuable contribution to make. An invaluable contribution to make. Islam has been established by men and women, and we tried to show that in our discussions as far as the role of Hazrat Khadija, salamu alayha, the role of her daughter, Hazrat Zahra alayha salam, and the role of her daughter, Hazrat Zainab al-Kubra, salamu alayha. 3 generations of Muslim women who were at the forefront of the battles to establish and protect this religion. So we should never at all forget this important facet. This evening, this verse that I read for you in the khutbah was from Surah Yasin, verse number 36, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, glory be to him who created pairs of everything, of what the earth grows, and of their own kind, meaning human beings, and of what they do not know. This idea that creation, existence, is found in pairs isn't unique to Islam. In fact, Taoist philosophy, if you know anything about Eastern philosophy, Taoist philosophy, you know, yin and yang, you might have seen these tattoos or symbols where you have the circle with 2 intersecting black and white things. This Taoist philosophy is also based on this concept that everything in the world has a pair. For every up, there's a down. For every hot, there's a cold. For every left, there's a right, and everything has a pair. And this is very evident not only in Taoist philosophy, but very much so in Islam. And so this evening I wanted to finish up our series of discussions by discussing and finishing up our discussion on the role of women in Islam by discussing this aspect of Islam, this aspect of balance between these pairs, male and female. So send the salawat and we'll begin our discussion.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
You
Muhammad.
guys sound like you're getting sick. Somebody go get some vitamin C for these people.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
In Islam, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has referred to his two hands. Now, we're not Wahhabis. We don't interpret the Quran literally. Every place in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about his hands, it doesn't mean that he actually has hands. We're not the nation of Islam. You guys know about the nation of Islam?
Yeah.
They say that Allah is a man. And how can you prove that Allah is a man? A-L-L-A-H. Arm, leg, arm, head. We're not like this. And we don't accept this ideology. Hands, when they're mentioned in Quran in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are a symbol of this two sides of Allah. Now, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, and we'll give a little more characteristics, a little more clarification on this. But these hands are symbolic of the power of Allah, of the intervention of Allah. And in Quran, we have many verses that refer to the two hands of Allah. Just as an example, Yadullah fawqa aydihim, that the hands of Allah are above their hands. This doesn't mean that Allah has hands. This means that the power of Allah is above all power. And so we see this repeated over and over in the Quran, with the right hand of Allah being symbolic for the mercy of Allah, and that left hand of Allah being symbolic for the wrath and the punishment of Allah. Just as an example to kind of make this a little more clear to you when I said these two sides of Allah. If you've ever studied in your Aqidah class, today we visited the Sunday school very briefly. We're out there, we checked out a lot of young people going and learning about Islam, and this is so important to have schools in our communities that are educating the youth. Because you see, Islam is one of those religions that the more you learn, the more confidence you get in your religion, the more you see that truly it's the truth. Now then, when you look at this issue of the sifat of Allah, the attributes of Allah, in all books of Aqidah, they divide the attributes of Allah into two types. Sifat thubutiyah and the sifat salbiyah. Sifat thubutiyah are those positive attributes of Allah, where we say Allah is. And those sifat salbiyah are those negative sifat of Allah, where we would say Allah is not. So as an example, we would say Hayy. The example of that Allah is alive. Hayy. This is a positive attribute of Allah. We say Allah is alive. Or alim, that Allah is knowledgeable. We say Allah is knowledgeable. But as an example of those sifat salbiyah, we have this example, for instance, of murakkab, that composite or made of parts, that Allah is not made of parts. Or jism, that Allah is not matter or physical. So we have these two different types of attributes in regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Positive attributes, negative attributes. Not to mention all those places in Quran where these two, you could say, two sides of Allah, two hands of Allah are mentioned. And if you send a salawat for me, I'll read some of those verses.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So, as an example, we have this verse of Quran where Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and Allah created you of dust, and then of a life germ, and then He made you pairs, and no female bears, nor does she bring forth except with his knowledge. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to his creation being created in pairs. Or again, we can look and see other verses of Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this concept of everything in existence having a pair. Again, we see in Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah 38, Surah Sa'ad, verse number 75, he said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, he, Allah said, O Iblis, what prevented you that you should do obeisance to him whom I created with my two hands? Are you proud, or are you of the exalted ones? Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that he created Adam with his two hands. This is very important, because you remember a few nights ago we mentioned that Adam is created from what? Mud and the Spirit of Allah. When we read in Quran about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam, he got some black dirt, black mud together, formed it into a human being, and then breathed into it of his essence. So here we have Adam again made of a pair of two things. Mud, which is like the lowest, most despicable thing on the face of the earth. Nobody likes to step in mud or to be in a muddy area. And then the most highest thing that we can ever imagine, the Spirit of Allah. And so therefore we can see that human beings have this potential inside of them to be muddy and dirty, or to be as high and spiritual with that Spirit of Allah component also. So again, we have this concept of pairs being in creation. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes that note where he says that I created Adam with my two hands, what he's saying to us is that Adam has these two attributes also. He can be good or bad. And Bani Adam is like this also. And just one more example for you in from Quran, in Surah Al-Zumar, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, he has created you from a single being, and then he made its mate of the same kind. And he made for you eight cattle in pairs, and he creates you in the wombs of your mother, a creation after a creation. So we see again that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to his creation being in pairs. And this is very important for us to take in and to acknowledge, because you see, without this balance in Islam, we run the risk of losing ourselves. That the input and the contributions of women are just as important as the input and the contributions of men. And we see this clearly, inshallah, from these verses of Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that this is perfectly natural, that you have pairs, that you have two types, that you have these two, and this balance must be maintained between these two. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So, in continuing our discussion, we found that there's no trace in Quran, as in other divine religions, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, there's no place in Quran where Allah says that women are inferior or made from an inferior stock. And just to remind you of what we said a few nights ago, where in the creation story in the Bible, it says that Allah first created Adam and then took a rib from the left side of Adam, and with that rib created Hawa. This is not mentioned in Quran. Woman is not viewed in Islam as a lesser being than man. Her creation is on an equal footing with man. And even in Quran, when Quran discusses the creation of woman, he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I created men and I created women. He doesn't say that I used some spare parts, that this woman is a parasite or secondary or inferior to man. He makes it clear, Allah does, throughout Quran, that these two are his creation, and it's perfectly natural to have these two pairs, and they're perfectly equal in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So this evening, I've been kind of hinting to you and dropping little hints here and there about the rights of men and women in Islam and discussing these things, especially from the point of view of that great book of Imam Sajjad alayhi salatu wassalam, where salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Imam Sajjad's Risalatul Huquq. And again, I encourage everybody, if you don't have Risalatul Huquq, it's available for free. You can check it out online. Look up Treatise on Rights in Islam by Imam Sajjad. It will come up. You have free access to it on the Imam Reza Network. Read this, become acquainted with these rights, because when we know our rights, when we know the rights of others, then there's less of a chance of us trampling on those rights and violating those rights. And it's important for us to learn of them. And especially because a lot of my audience has been young people, which is the way I like it, you know? To be honest with you, a lot of times the old guys, they're a little more traditional and they can't always quite catch what I'm trying to say. I've been known to get them upset with me sometimes. But the young people, you know, sometimes we're on the same wavelength and we can get across to each other. But when we look at this, I want to make it clear to you from Risalatul Huquq, I want to mention, especially for the young people, the rights of mothers. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, in his treatise on rights, he says, the right of your mother is that you know that she carried you where no one carries anyone. She gave to you the fruit of her heart, that which no one gives to anyone. And she protected you with all of her organs. This is so beautiful because if you imagine that when a woman is pregnant, all of her organs are moved during this pregnancy as a way to protect this child. And even the woman is hardwired. You'll find that women who are going through malnutrition, malnourished societies, the child can still be born healthy. Because how Allah hardwired the women is that before that baby suffers, the woman will. Her bones will be leached of calcium to support this child. This is why this osteoporosis is so big amongst women and not so much so amongst men, because during pregnancy, these babies live off of the sustenance of their mothers. And Allah has made it in such a way that this woman will suffer long before that embryo will. So the fact that Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam is saying that she protected you,
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
that she
Muhammad.
protected you, your mother protected you during her pregnancy with all of her organs is very profound. He goes on to say, she did not care if she went hungry as long as you ate, if she was thirsty as long as you got a drink, if she was naked as long as you were clothed, if she was in the sun as long as you was in the shade. She gave up sleep for your sake. She protected you from heat and cold, all in order that you might belong to her. You will not be able to show gratitude to her unless through Allah's help and giving you success. This is so profound that no matter what we do in our life, no matter how we try to repay our mothers, those women in our lives, and this goes for wives too, we can never repay them that debt, that gratitude that we owe them, unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
But you
Muhammad.
know, the men will be waiting for me outside after the speech unless I mention their rights too. And some of these guys are pretty big. And they don't let me travel with a gun on the airplane. So we have to mention the rights of the fathers also, right? Because we're talking tonight about pairs. And I want to get it through, especially to the young people in regards to their mothers. We just read about the rights of mothers. Now let's mention the rights of the fathers. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Imam Sajjad says, the right of your father is that you know that he is your root. Without him, you would not be. Whenever you see anything in yourself which pleases you, know that your father is the root of its blessing upon you. So praise Allah and thank him in that measure, and there is no strength save in Allah. That's the end of it. Please recognize something. The long explanation that Imam Sajjad gave about the rights of women and he sums up the rights of mothers, and he sums up the rights of fathers in this one thing. Anytime you see anything in yourself that pleases you, you look in the mirror and you just love the way your eyes look, or you look in the mirror and you like your nose, or you're proud of your intelligence, or you're proud of your strength, your father is the root of that blessing for you. And this is so important for us to remember also, that this balance has to be maintained between us. We have to show that proper level of respect and love and gratitude, not just for the mothers and not just for the fathers, but for both of them. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
But of course, some of these young guys are pretty big too. And if I don't mention the rights of the children, me and some of these young guys might have some problems also. So, the rights of the children, just so that the young people can know their rights. The right of your child is that you should know that he is from you and will be ascribed to you. Through both his good deeds and his evil deeds, in the immediate affairs of this world and in the hereafter, you are responsible for what has been entrusted to you, such as educating him in good conduct, pointing him in the direction of his Lord, and helping him to obey him. So act towards your child with the action of one who knows that he will be rewarded for doing good towards him and punished for evil doing. This is so important. You know, a lot of times we as parents, we take on this attitude that, you know, these kids, what they do is for them. But really, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Imam is saying, our children are ascribed to us. That means on Yawm al-Qiyamah, we'll be asked about our children. And especially if we failed them in our rights, in their rights. The rights of educating them, the rights of pointing them towards their Lord, and the rights of helping them to achieve that closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we fail as parents, as mother or father in this regard, then what good has been our life? We'll be asked on the day of judgment about these children. These children are around our necks like our deeds are around our necks. And we're expected to act towards these children as though they have rights and that they are worthy of these rights, that they should be fulfilled. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now, this evening I wanted to just make a little more quick points about the rights of women. Simply because many times, and especially for the young people present, we don't want to be misguided by the news media or by the TV shows or by the movies that are out there with all of their propaganda against Islam. Because they've spread a good message to make us think that women have no rights. And oftentimes, we as Muslims, we don't even know the rights of our wives. So this evening I just want to mention to you very quickly some of those rights that we may often overlook. For instance, a woman has the right to choose her own spouse. You can't force anybody on anybody else. She has the right to choose her spouse. Now, of course, her parents should advise her, should guide her. It's up to her community to protect her and to help her in these choices. But at the end of the day, she's going to be the one who has to live with that Yahoo. And it's her choice to make which Yahoo she's going to live with. So from this point of view, we should keep that in mind. Another right of the women is the right of mahar, or that bride gift. When we give a woman her mahar, this is hers. We can't ask for anything from that. If your wife is working, that's her money. It's still your responsibility to support her, and you can't ask her for anything. If she gives you of her own free will from her mahar or from her earnings, then that's the blessings of Allah that she's seeking. But we as men have no right to demand that from her or to ask that from her. This is her property and it belongs to her. Another right that we might overlook is the right to nafaqah, the right to maintenance. No matter if you have a wife with the wealth of Hazrat Khadija alayhi salam, you still have to support that wife. It doesn't matter if she's a wealthy woman. It doesn't matter how much money she has in the bank or how much inheritance she has. It It doesn't matter. It's your job to support your wife. And this is one of her rights. Nafaqa is one of her rights. And the only time that a man is not required to pay nafaqa is when his wife is in open rebellion to him. Then he can stop paying that nafaqa. And again, the right to administer and own her own property. If a woman owns property or wealth or anything, she's in charge of that wealth. It doesn't come under the administration of her husband or her daddy or anybody else. It's her wealth, and she's the one who has the right to administer that. Now, one thing that I always get a kick out of telling people this, that did you know that women also have the right to charge you for any housework they do in the house? Now the men, they're like, oh man, this guy's wrecking my day. My wife's gonna put a punch clock in the kitchen now. No, but she has the right to say, I'm not washing them dishes less than you pay me. I'm not doing the clothes less than you pay me. And she can ask for that, and that is her right. Now, luckily, most of our women, out of the love of their family, they take care of us. They take care of the children. But really, she can ask for pay for that work. And this is one of her rights. Another thing that always gets brothers, that they're always surprised at, a woman can charge her husband for the breast milk that she feeds her child. And we might say, well, you know, but it's her child. No, Baba, it's your child that she's feeding. And she can charge you for that breast milk. She can charge you by the gallon. She can charge you by the pint. And you better hope she doesn't get it in her head to do that. Otherwise, we would be broke. Especially me with 8 kids, my Lord, man, it'd be over. At any rate, these are some of the rights of women that we often overlook. And of course, men have rights too. And of course, we should mention them, and perhaps we will mention them at another time, on another occasion when we get the chance. However, this evening we're discussing and we're finishing up our discussion about the rights of women and the role of women in the development of Islam. Now, a couple nights ago, we mentioned the examples of Hazrat Khadija, Hazrat Zainab, Hazrat Fatima, alayhim as-salam. But understand that these women that we mentioned from Quran, these women that we mentioned from the history of Islam, they're not the only women that we have in the history of Islam that have participated in the building and defending of this religion. Islamic history is filled with the stories of women who undertook various forms of activism. Just as an example, the first martyr in Islam, the first shaheed in Islam was a woman, Sumayya, the mother of Ammar Yasir. She was tortured and killed right before the eyes of Hazrat Ammar, and she was the first martyr of Islam. The first person that gave up their life for this religion was a woman. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
We have other examples of women also too, like Amara, who defended the Prophet at the Battle of Uhud. That when these men ran away, and some of these so-called companions ran away and left Prophet, it was a woman who armed herself and defended Prophet. And this is very important not to forget that. Also, we have Hazrat Nasiba bint Ka'b. Nasiba bint Ka'b was one of those women that participated in 13 battles of Islam. She was present with Prophet at the Battle of Uhud, and she participated in 13 other battles throughout the history of Islam after the life of Prophet. And this woman, really, she's a very typical woman. She always went to the battlefront with the army as a nurse. And she would participate in that capacity as a nurse, taking care of the wounded soldiers, getting bandages, and these type of things. But whenever the battle got hot, Nasiba was known to pick up a shield and grab a sword and go to work. And as we said, she participated in 13 battles. In her old age, the young girls of Medina used to crowd around her just to touch the scars on her body that she had. She had one particularly vicious scar on her shoulder that was inflicted by an enemy combatant. And the young girls of Medina would get inspiration from this Nasiba based on her participation in these battles of Islam. So these women have been at the forefront of the defense of Islam from the very beginning. Aside from the ladies of Imam Hussein's household who were present at Karbala, there were other women also that went to Karbala with Imam Hussein or joined with Imam Hussein's party after they reached Karbala. And just to mention some of these women for you, we have the example of Wahab, who was the wife of Umayr Kalbi. When Umayr Kalbi was in Kufa and he heard that Imam Hussein had been stopped at Karbala and was surrounded, he gave his wife the news that I'm going to help Imam Hussein. And his wife responded, that's a very good idea, take me with you. So they both set out, escaped from Kufa, and joined with Imam Hussein. On the day of Ashura, this Wahab was watching the battle from the tents of the women. And she saw her husband fighting there and trying to defend Imam Hussein. She calls out to her husband, give up your life for the defense of your Imam and his family. And when she saw the battle get hot, she picked up a stick and went out to the battlefield and to a certain extent engaged the enemy in defending Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Imam Hussein saw her actions and sent her back to the tents of the women saying, go back to the tents. The women should not participate in war. She obeyed her Imam and went back to the tent. After her husband was martyred, he was that first shaheed on the day of Ashura. She went out to the battlefield and was brushing the dust from his face and was saying, may Allah reward you with paradise, and may Allah also make me your companion in the paradise as well. At that moment, Shimra ibn al-Jawshan ordered one of the combatants to kill Wahab, and she was killed right there with the stroke of the sword next to her husband. That her dua was answered, and she became the companion of her husband in paradise also. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So we have many, many examples of this. Another example was that of Janada ibn Ka'b. He had come with his wife Bahriya and his son Amr. When Janada died, when the husband died, Bahriya sent Amr to go and fight for the Imam, to go and defend the Imam. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he was hesitant to let this young man go and fight because his wali, his father, had just been killed. But when he found out that this young man had been prepared for battle, dressed for battle by his own mother, then he relented and allowed him to go into the battlefield. And as a result, Bahriya remained so focused for the attention and for the protection of Imam Hussein that she was willing to give up not just her husband, but her son also. She had grief, she was sad, but she realized that the defense of Islam was greater even than her own life, or the life of her husband, or the life of her son. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
When the fighting got hot, Bahriya also went to the battlefield. Riwayat says she picked up an iron club and went out to the battlefield and engaged the enemy. And again, Imam Hussein had to tell this woman, go back to the tents of the ladies. The fighting and the war is not for the women. But this is just a few examples for us to see that it's not just these holy personalities that are mentioned in Quran or that are mentioned in the history of Islam. Ordinary women, ordinary mu'minat, ordinary believing women oftentimes stepped up in the defense of Islam and sacrificed their own lives and the lives of their loved ones for the defense and for the establishment of Islam. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Another famous example is Dulham. She was married to Zuhair ibn Qayn. And I'm sure you've heard this name, Zuhair ibn Qayn. Zuhair ibn Qayn was one of those people that actually went with the army of Ibn Ziyad to the battlefield of Karbala. He was on the enemy's side. And Imam Hussein sends a letter to him. MashaAllah, Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein knows who to call. Imam Hussein knows who to summon to his side. He sends a letter to Zuhair ibn Qayn. And Zuhair ibn Qayn knows that this letter means shahadat for him. So at first, he trembles. He doesn't want to open this letter. But it's his wife Dulham who says, open the letter of your Imam. Your Imam has sent a letter to you. He has singled you out. And he has invited you to his camp. You must open the letter and you must go and meet with him. Respecting her advice, Zuhair ibn Qayn went and came back elated and declaring that he was going to join with Imam Hussein. She bid her husband farewell and she said, may I be your helper and protector, and may I accompany you in this journey. And at this, she weeping, her husband told her no, she weeping, but she had to let her husband go. She had encouraged him to join with Imam Hussein, and she basically talked her husband into accepting the advice of Imam Hussein, going and meeting with Imam Hussein, and then escaping from the enemy's side and joining with Imam Hussein. So we see that these ladies have always been at the very forefront of the establishment of Islam, at the very front of the battle of protecting Islam. And today also, we should always remember that in the establishment of Islam in this country, in the establishment of our communities, from state to state, from region to region, we cannot let these women be left out. Their input must be respected. Their participation has to happen. It's not just men who are responsible for establishing Islam. And it's not just men that have a contribution to make. We must remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in pairs, and that it's only through balancing these pairs that Islam will be successful, that Islam will be established, and that Islam will be protected. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
But you know, I think we have made it very clear indeed, about the role of women in Islam, about their duty in Islam, about their participation in building this religion, and defending this religion, and establishing this religion. And I don't think that any of us can look at women in an inferior way at all, based on these Quran, verses of Quran and ahadith that I've mentioned to you. But at the same time, I don't want the young people to feel left out. And especially a lot of these young guys that are sitting around here. So this evening I want to tell you the story, in finishing our discussion, about a young man. You know, on the night of Ashura, Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam,
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
He assembles his companions. And he tells all of them, look, this army that is assembled here, they want me. They're here to kill me. Each and every one of you can escape. Each and every one of you can leave here. Imam Hussein goes so far as to take away his bay'ah from them. He frees them from their oaths of allegiance. He says, look, if what's going to hold you back from escaping is because you swore your allegiance to me, then I take it back. You're free. Leave me. That night at Ashura, there was no moon in the sky. It wasn't like it was a full moon. It was a new moon. The sky was black. Imam Hussein orders that all the torches in the camp should be put out. Imam Hussein is telling these people, look, I've relieved you of your allegiance to me. I'll put out all the lights. You can leave. And then to give them a little bit more encouragement, he says, if you want to leave, then take also a member of my household. What's he doing? He's giving them an out, as we say on the street. He's telling them that, look, maybe you feel guilty, but maybe it'll make you feel better if you feel like you're defending my family. In that darkness, every one of his companions, every one of his family members, they all reply, Imam Hussein, how can we leave you? We would never do such a thing. We would prefer to be killed, raised again, killed again, raised again, killed again in your defense. So when the torches are relit and the lights come on, those same companions that were there before the lights went out, they were still there when the lights came back on. Now Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he's prepared them for the battle. So now he announces to them, tomorrow all of you will be martyred. You know, in the old days, kids, young people didn't sit with the grown men. When the grown men were sitting up front listening to Imam Hussein, younger men, younger boys were pushed to the back of the crowd. You can see this little head in that crowd, wondering to himself, thinking to himself, Imam Hussein has said all of us will be martyred tomorrow. Does he mean me also, or just the men? Does he mean that I'll be martyred because I'm not a grown man, I'm just a little boy? Will I be martyred also, or is he only talking to the men? So from the back of the crowd, a little hand comes up and says, oh, my uncle, will I also be martyred tomorrow? He wants to know, is he included in this group of martyrs or not? Imam Hussein says, I'll answer your question. I'll answer your question, Ya Qasim, if you answer my question first. Imam Hussein asks Hazrat Qasim, who was no older than many of these boys that are here tonight, maybe 12, 13, 14. He asks him, what is your idea of death? What do you think about death, Ya Qasim? The reply of Qasim shows the maturity that we expect from our youth. Qasim says, Ahla min al-asal. It's sweeter to me than the taste of honey. That if I should die in your defense, O my uncle, it's more valuable to me than anything in the world. Then Imam Hussein replies to him, yes, Qasim, you will be shaheed tomorrow also. On the day of Ashura, when the companions of Imam Hussein, one after the other, when the family members of Imam Hussein were being wiped out, one after the other, Hazrat Qasim comes to his uncle and says, uncle, can I have permission to enter the battlefield? At first his uncle says no. You have to realize, Imam Hussein loved his brother so much. Imam Hussein loved Imam Hassan and longed for Imam Hassan, missed Imam Hassan so much that he couldn't bear to let this Qasim go to the battlefield. So at first he tells him, no, Qasim, I don't give you permission, you cannot go. Qasim asks again, Imam Hussein tells him no. Finally, Qasim, like any 12 or 13-year-old boy, he circumvents the issue and he goes to his mother. He says, my uncle won't give me permission. What should I do? Just then, Qasim's mother remembers that she has a letter from Imam Hassan. And this letter had been given to her by Imam Hassan and said, look, on a day that you will know what that day is, and at a time when you will know what that time is, give this letter to my brother. This letter is given to Hazrat Qasim, and the letter is sent to Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein, when Qasim arrives and he sees this letter, he's surprised. What note is this? So he opens it up. And as he opens it up, tears begin to stream from his eyes. It's been years, so long since he's seen the handwriting of his brother. He can look at the style of writing, at the words that are used, at the way the letter is written, and tell that this is the letter of Al-Hassan to Al-Hussein. And in this letter, he reads where his brother says, Ya Hussein, I know that you don't want to give Qasim permission, but today Qasim is my representative to you. Today Qasim is taking my place with you. Give him permission to enter the battle in your defense. Understand that this caravan, they had not set out prepared for war. Those armaments that they had brought with them were not that many. And as a result, the armor that was there was too big for Qasim. It was the armor of grown men. The shields that were there were shields for grown men, and it was too heavy for Hazrat Qasim to hold up. Even the swords that were there were big swords, swords that were intended to be used by grown men, and it was too big a weapon for Hazrat Qasim to wield handily. So in this way, with a hodgepodge mix of armaments, Hazrat Qasim enters the battlefield in defense of his uncle. And believe it or not, this 13, 14-year-old boy was able to dispatch no less than 10 enemy combatants, some riwayat say 17, to the fires of hell. But at one point, remember, Qasim has no shield. Qasim has no helmet. And when the enemies come to attack Qasim, he's able to ward off some of their blows, but a blow comes from one direction, and he raises his left arm to deflect that blow. And the sword cuts clean through the skin, clean through the bone, so that his arm is left dangling by just a piece of flesh. And he cries out, "Oh my uncle, where are you? Oh my uncle, come to my rescue." Imam Hussein, when he hears the voice of Qasim, he mounts his horse, whips the horse, and rushes to the side of Al-Qasim. But now Qasim, it's too late for him. The enemies have pounced upon him and have killed him. As Imam Hussein reaches to the side of Qasim, he scatters the enemies away from the body, and he gets down next to his nephew and he says, "Oh my nephew, it's so painful for me that you called for me to help you and I was not able to arrive in time, that my help was too late for you, that I was not able to save you." And even the enemy reporters recite that when Imam Hussein picked up the body of Qasim, they said that they would never forget that on his feet was only one sandal. And that one sandal strap was broken and was dangling from his foot in the same way that his arm was now dangling by a single thread of flesh. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمِ. Ya Allah.